we got to do is start getting results in the legal system, start showing the victims and survivor this is a safe place to be, is to speak out. We are going after these bastards. We are nailing them. Come forward, be part of that machine that does some destruction.
It's a horrific thing to do to a child, to take that innocence away from a child. You take that innocence and it's gone forever.
Hello. So we have the return of the viewer favourite, John Wedger. He has his own YouTube channel, as many of you are aware, and his links are in the description box. And perhaps some of you have seen Alan Merritt on John's channel. So Alan is here as well. As you can see from his t-shirt, he is campaigning for beach home survivors. And all the links for that will also be in the description box, as will the address to write to Pepsi Watson if you want, which John is working on keeping Pepsi's morale boosted presently. So if anyone wants to join in the letter writing campaign with writing to Pepsi, that's going to be down there as well. So today, you know, it's graphic content warning. We're going some dark places, but these are important stories that need to be told because we are educating people about the horrors of what happened in these care homes. It has become a reoccurring theme on this channel whereby kids are abused, then they get onto drugs because they're not given the tools to deal with it, then they get into criminality, women get into sex work, men get into drug dealing or stealing, over and over and over again. And if we can uphold our mission statement on this channel by ending the war on drugs and putting all that money into going after the predators and giving them proper sentences, not little slaps on the wrist like what we're seeing. And we're working with Andrew Wallace now of Unseen, who helped bring in the Modern Day Slavery and Trafficking Act, whereby these predators are getting life sentences now. We are actually combined, all of us combined, can make real changes in the world. And that's what's important about this channel. We don't just want people coming on and sharing the stories. We want people getting out there and doing stuff and getting these changes made, because the justice system is upside down. You've got young people in prison doing like decades for drugs, and you've got pedo priests getting slaps on the wrist because the church comes in, Sins of Our Father, you haven't seen it on Netflix, and just passes them around to a different diocese, hundreds of victims. So it's absolutely obscene, and the knock-on effects from the child abuse, the criminality, the victims that come about from the armed robberies and all this other stuff, all stems, if you go back to the root cause of it. Stop these predators. As a deterrent, give them life sentences, give them chemical castration, whatever is required to be changed in the law. Well, we got two guys here today who are, you know, at the spearhead of making these changes. So it's a real privilege to have John back on. Cheers. And to have Alan here.
Thank you.
Before Alan gets into his harrowing story, John is going to give us a little background information.
Yeah, like most things, there's always a history. These things are by design, they're never by accident. And I think in one of the other podcasts I did with you, Sean, a couple of podcasts ago, we went on to about how people scratch their heads. How does this thing get so big? And why is there no political intervention? And if there is, it's a matter of an inquiry, not an investigation. And then they said, we've learnt lessons, let's move on. You know, and we're talking the most heinous of crimes. So we've got to look back in history. And, you know, there's nothing new under the sun. And that's that. And once you understand history, then you're better prepared to know how to deal with this. And you're right. 1/6 of the UK's budget goes on something to do with the justice system. You know, when we see that 80% of people that have been in prison, they go on to reoffend. 80% of people in prison come from abusive childhood backgrounds. It doesn't take an expert to work out, you know, in the penal system, what is going badly awry. When you've got in Scandinavia, you've got in Norway, you've got a 20% reoffending rate. Well, I'll tell you what, that ain't bad odds. We've got an 80%. I defined this once. I was giving an analogy to someone, and I said, if I was a contractor, a building contractor, and I said to someone, right, they want an extension built, right, I'm going to sort this out. I'm going to get a builder in that the government recommend. This builder charges you £450 an hour, which is a going rate for a solicitor stroke barrister in the justice system, right? And each day your bill is going to be £8,000, which is the fee for a trial for the day. But bear in mind, 80% of all the buildings this guy builds falls down instantly. Are you gonna? I mean, they're going to tell you where to go.
We have brought in the America model, which I was steeped in, and it is just a corrupt money go round where the private prison contracts are in the tens of billions a year, and those private prisons give the Democrats, the Republicans, tens of millions a year to keep it going. It's called political contributions, aka bribery. But that's come to the UK, and we've got the highest incarceration rate in the world
but
now.
Also, when we
Europe, sorry.
When we look at our childcare system, how many paedophiles have saturated it? Known paedophiles, and they've been endorsed by politicians. You know, I'm going to go on about PI, Paedophile Information Exchange, a pro-paedophile group that was promoting sex with young boys and grown men and seen as consensual. We've seen how that was allowed by Harriet Harman, you know, and how these people that were members of PI were allowed to dictate to our social care system, you know, and set down the precedents of how children looked after. I mean, this is absolute madness. This really is lunatics taking over the asylum, you know. So what we've got to look at is that there has been orphanages, as we could term them, since the 15th century. Records, you know, go back that far. And ones back then were set up really by Christian charities, by the church. Not much more is really known about it. You know, I'm no expert, but, you know, like most things, I like to know my case and I like to do my research. Until 1834, when we started seeing the Poor Laws Union coming in. Now, we've got to look at the UK was really prospering. You know, Victorian England was thriving. We had an empire that is yet to be rivaled. And, you know, everything needed to be showcased, especially in London. You know, so seeing children destitute on the streets of London wasn't the done thing. Something had to be done. And some of the things that the Victorians brought in were quite benevolent. They were very forward thinking, you know, especially when it comes to things like sanitation, sewage systems and things like that. You know, we were implementing them, you know, more than anyone else was. You know, like, you look, take India, there's places there which still haven't got a proper sewage system, which, you know, beggars belief. And also when you see the street children in places like the Far East, you know, and India, you sort of sit there and think, well, how's that come about? But this was a situation that the UK was in, you know, in the 1800s, in the 19th century. So the empire was building. There was a lot of work and families were migrating. So we're seeing a lot of migration from rural areas into the capital. There was nowhere to house them. There was no social housing and slums started. So we're getting areas like the East End and places like that. And kids were then exposed to corruption, you know. And if people couldn't pay their bills, then they were put in the workhouses and children followed in, right? So what was brought in, I can't remember exactly who it was, but they brought in a law just saying that children should not be in workhouses. There's got to be a better place for them. So the orphanages, as we know them, were set up and they were divided into categories. So as the decades went on, they evolved. So to start with, you had like church would build orphanages, local businesses would get together and set up orphanages. You've got philanthropists such as Dr. Thomas Bernardo, who I do want to go on about, you know, shortly, not all as it seems on that front as well. And these places started coming in, right? So you had some things called district schools were set up and they were taking the kids back to rural areas. So they were going back out into the countryside, setting up these homes and getting the kids into work and into education. And after that, you saw a massive influx in what we call the cottage/village homes, which is what Beach Home was. It was a village home. These were self-contained villages in their own right. They had their own sports facilities, their own schools, their own churches. You know, they were all inclusive and they covered massive acreages of land. You had things called scattered homes, and these were like single homes which were put in a community. So the kids were more integrated into community and they would go to a local school. And then there was another thing called boarding, which is what we know as fostering, and that was always seemed as the better thing to do. But one thing that all these had in common was that they were getting funded by the Poor Laws Union. So there was money in this, right? How much, I'm not too sure. But what we got to look at also is that children become a commodity. They become a commodity, and it was classed as national and international provision. So there was a need for these children. So children were being exported to the colonies. They were going out to Rhodesia, they were going out to Australia, and they were going out to Canada. 130,000 children were exported out. Mainly they were coming from London, from Ireland, and from Liverpool. And one of the biggest exporters of children was Dr. Thomas Bernardo. Now, he went on to set up the Bernardo's care homes. Now, I've got to be very careful what I do. I don't want to get myself caught in any sort of legal wrangle here. But this man is dead. And, he had a lot to answer for, because not only was he exporting these kids out to Canada, they were being auctioned. And they were being auctioned into servitude and hard labour from the ages of 3 to 14. Now, this really takes some looking at. These kids were taken off the street. They were classed as waifs and strays, and we hear that term quite a bit. And they were meant to be put in an environment that is not going to corrupt them, and it's going to cater for them, taking them out of poverty and immorality and things like that. But they were getting shipped out, little tiny children, out to Canada, which has a harsh climate, has, perishing winters. And these kids were taken to rural areas. They were auctioned, and they were given, sold into farming families, and some of which had no concept of how to look after their kids. There's anecdotal evidence that came out of the government inquiry of one guy that was kept in a shed and made to live with a dog. And we hear that with the testimony of Jenny, the black girl that I interviewed, who was kept in a shed, and her foster parents were given an award for their service to ethnic and disadvantaged children of difference, which meant handicapped and black kids, and they kept her in a shed. That's in the UK, but these kids were being sold on. They experienced horrors. Many of them tried to then get into the military to sort of get away from it, to serve in the war was seen as a better option. And they were kept in servitude till they were 18, so they knew no different. And a lot of them weren't educated; they were withheld. And Canada's a massive country. I mean, it's this huge, huge country. So, we're seeing that go in, and things do evolve. In the 1930s, what happened then was local authorities took back the power. But when you've got religious institutions, there was no umbrella company that was dealing, or institution looking over them. So you've got things like the De La Salle brothers, who were setting up care homes and were abusing, Catholic institution, where they were abusing the boys. Again, the De La Salle, Alan, that's where the lovely Blair brothers were. Yeah. I think were in the De La Salle home, yeah. And they were pimped out, and they were made to rape each other, yeah, while priests masturbated, and they were getting paid. You see. But there was no regulation. And this is something interesting that came out of the government inquiry, the IICSE. I know these inquiries get a hard time by the survivor community, saying, well, people need to be nicked. Well, listen, something is better than nothing. If it gets out in the air, then it's something. That we look at Lord Janner, got a huge mention, as did Leon Britton, in these inquiries. Had it been left to the press, it would have never got out. Or it would have been a very slanted, one-sided tale coming from pro their camp, and not really from the survivor angle. So, we look at what was coming out of the government inquiries, and we got to take note with this, because there's some harsh facts there. 80% of Catholic institutions in the UK do not come under the jurisdiction of the Vatican. They're splinter groups. So if they're not being adjudicated by the government, by the councils and the boroughs, as was brought in the 1930s Act, they're pretty much self-regulating. And if then the Vatican won't take responsibility of them, well, what happens? You know? Now, things may have been set up with good intention, but the road to hell was paved with good intention, as we know. Now, abuse never really got recognised until the 1980s. The 1980s, you know. As well as these residential homes, there was correctional institutions. The first juvenile prison was Parkhurst on the Isle of Wight. Borstalls were then brought in to stop the 16 to 21-year-olds getting into crime. Detention centres were brought in, but they could only limit to a 3-month sentence. This is where we got the short, sharp shock, where they would get the ex-military guys in to really sort of run the kids ragged and you know, hammer some discipline into them. And again, we hear time and time, especially when we go to the aged criminals like Lambriano, they said actually all it did was make him stronger and more angry. It didn't actually do any good at all. And these sort of paved their way into what we know as the youth offending institutes. And on top of that, we get things like secure units. But all of them are money making. Every single one of these things is down to make money. Now, when it comes to abuse and testimonies coming out from victims and survivors who then go on to form groups like Alan and the Beach Home team do, I mean, before they never really got listened to. And then they started getting listened to and patterns started to emerge. And one of the things, a guy who gives one of the best testimonies to this is James Reeves, Alan. James Reeves gives a phenomenal testimony. And it's the role that women play in the sexual abuse of children in care homes. And James's story is that he was in a residential home, I think in Essex, and it was boys and girls, but it was a woman that was running them. And what they did to try and make it less regimented, they would give them titles such as auntie and uncle, you know, and things like that to make it look like a homely environment. And so this was children, I think, from very infant school age up until post-pubescent teenage years. The girls were made to line up on the hall every night, line up and sit and watch. The main woman who was in charge, the main auntie of this house, would sit a chair in the hall. The boys from the ages of 5 up until in their teens were made to line up naked, stripped naked, and were walked in one by one to be thrashed and caned in front of the girls. I mean, what is that going to do to your mind? You know, it's going to twist your mind so abhorrently. And so why are women abusing children like this? Why were women allowed to abuse children? Well, there's always a reason, right? People, let's get this right. People sexually abuse children for one reason, because they want to. No one forces them to, they want to. And we can sit and we can blame duress due to satanic abuse, you know, and everything else, or mental health problems. No, you choose to do it. It might be done in a satanic environment. And as we have seen, like with Isabella, in an indigenous negative belief system such as voodoo environment, but at the end of the day, they choose to do it. And they found that when these homes were set up, there's always a lack of men. A lot of kids end up on the street because the men aren't there, you know. And it's a common denominator all the time, a lack of men. We hear it all the time when we hear, you know, rap singers calling out for anti-gun violence, you know, gang violence, gun violence, and saying, where's the male role models? Well, exactly, where are the male role models? But the UK has been fraught with campaigns from Napoleonic to the First World War, you know, to the Second World War. Okay, recently, not so much in that respect. But, you know, during the turn of the last century, right through to the middle of the last century, there wasn't much respite for men in this country, you know. They were getting pretty much a hard time. So there was a lack of men due to the campaigns that were going on and due to the empire building. So women were brought in to manage these homes. A lot of the women that abused tended to be in their 50s, that sort of age group, and were unmarried or war widows. Now, there's something else comes in, the psychology of this comes in. Well, why would they do that? Where's the matriarchal sense? Well, we saw it in the Catholic institutions with the sisters, with the convents, the spitefulness of these unmarried, barren women, as it was classed, And Karine Hutstabat, the FBI profiler, always goes on about the abuse that a woman can mete out to a child is on a level of spite that a man could not muster, However, men do go on to abuse far, far more. But this is what was going on. Women were responsible for the majority of the abuse in the early years of the last century. Post-war, men started to come into the scene, right? But they were never classed as professional people. So they were never brought in when it comes to strategy meetings. So they felt devalued. Now, there's a saying that goes with this, Sean, it's called kicking the office cat. So they were some of the staff were so disgruntled at not having any value in their life because the authorities wouldn't see them as professionals. So they would go back and they'd take it out on the kids. The men came in to try and balance this out. And we saw men that had served in military campaigns, which would be classed now as post-traumatic stress disorder. There was a lot more harsh discipline back in them days. And so the abuse started to change. And what you find in the care homes, girls are 6 times more likely to be sexually abused than boys. But if boys are abused, majority of abuse on boys is homosexual sexual abuse. Now, again, this is not pointing the finger at the homosexual community or anything else. These are facts that came out of the government findings. But we look at politics now. So we've looked at the influence war has had and the rise of the empire has had on kids' homes. Now, we got to look politically. We started getting more and more boys sexually abused. And another fact is that the care homes where the most amount of abuse went on were always in Labour-run constituencies. And again, that's not by accident. This is going to dovetail into something that I said in one of my previous interviews with you, Sean, about paedophiles in Parliament. We started looking at moving now into the 1960s equality laws coming in. Okay, so men that wanted sex with children were worming their way into the care system under the auspice of being a homosexual. They didn't need to provide verifiable references because it was seen as discriminatory or intrusive. So all they had to do was provide 2 references, which could have come from their friends or they could come from fictitious bodies. They were not allowed to check up on them, and they were then given a job. And if they were caught abusing a kid, they could then hide behind the fact that you're picking on me because I'm homosexual. Okay, so this is what was happening. In reality, these people were paedophiles that found their way in. And then what we also started seeing is the influence that paedophilia in Parliament, local authority and the education system started having on these care homes, right? So a report came out in 1945 called the Curtis Report, and it was really damning. And it was just to say, look, these kids are getting a hard time because it was post-war. And when they come back and they started evaluating what had gone on, they realised there was a problem with kids coming out of the care system or in the care system. So the Curtis Report was brought in to say, look, if kids have got no mum and dad, which the Second World War had a massive influx of illegitimate babies. You know, men were away fighting and there were women getting pregnant by American soldiers, by local men and everything else. And it was frowned upon in them days, you know. And we saw it more recently in Southern Ireland with the convent homes, you know, that going on there. So there was this huge spike in illegitimate babies and they were given up to care. Now, if they didn't have a mum and dad, they were put straight into adoption. But if they had any sort of family, they were told that they must be kept together. But it wasn't policed. So it was just ignored. And they found that the men that started working in the care homes, becoming managers, were drinking with the senior social workers. So you've got this conspiracy of silence coming in, this very pally environment started building up all round, you know. The Children's Act came in 1948 to sort of really make these care homes legally accountable for what was going on, for the abuse that was going on. But again, nothing was really done until the 1980s. But it was influenced. The social care system was influenced at a very high level, and it was influenced by academics, paedophile academics that had connections to Parliament and to the higher echelons of the church. And the example of this is a guy called Peter Wrighton. Peter Wrighton was an ex-military guy. He was an academic. He became a senior social worker. He was a probation officer. He became an English teacher. And he started writing papers to do with social care. And he ended up becoming a senior lecturer for the Open University. And I think there's I'll get the name of the report. He wrote a report which became the Bible for social care and for social services to follow. The man was a paedophile. He openly stated that sex between a carer and a resident should not be frowned upon. Now, that is totally contrary to the law, right? It's called abuse of position of trust. That is prison. If a teacher, a police officer, a social worker is having sex with anyone, that's prison. End of. This guy went totally against it, yet he was allowed his voice, right? His best friend was a bloke called Charles Napier. Charles Napier was a founder of Pi, right? It was his best friend. Charles Napier is a convicted paedophile. Peter Wrighton was caught importing child pornography from Holland. And he just come out with the fact that he never ordered it, but they sent it to him and he was willing to accept it, but he didn't know what it was. It was child pornography, you know. And this guy was writing the papers for social care. He was lecturing at the Open University. Another one of his best friends was a bishop. You know, all these people have influence. All of them have influence. Peter Wrighton was also found to be member number 51 when they raided Pi's office. So he's an active paedophile and protected at the highest possible echelons. Now, what came in from the Kirk's report was the implementation of kids in care with the 100-year rule. Now, we hear it all the time, the 100-year rule, 100-year rule. And what it is, it's a disclosure act, right? I mentioned before about a D notice. A D notice is served when any media agency wants to expose something that could potentially affect the government. And they were serving D notices on journalists that were speaking out about paedophiles in Parliament. But they are a tool of the military intelligence service, right? D notices were brought in during the First World War under the Official Secrets Act to silence it. So why is an intelligence and MI5, MI6 tool used on civilians? It don't make sense. This is all the work of Winston Churchill, okay, who again, questions can be asked about this guy. You know, seen on one hand as being the saviour of the Second World War, but there's another element of truth behind this as well. So Winston Churchill decided that the 100-year rule is going to apply to care homes. And 100 years is used because legally that's the lifespan of a human being, right? That's why it's 100 years. It's 30 years with politics, but when it comes to individuals, it's 100 years. It used to be for medical records, and then they made it for all their records. So you could see these cover-ups coming time and time again. And then we moved to more modern times. They've got away from the big village schools like Beach Home, and now it's gone to the smaller private-run businesses. And like I mentioned before, this is a money-making entity. £2,000 per child per week. Bosh, 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 bosh. And then what we have seen with the children being trafficked out, it's nothing new. Barnardo's was part of the machinery that was doing it, part of the machinations that allowed this to go on, you know. And then these people are revered as being the saviours, but are they really? You know, we were a good friend of ours, Sandy, was in a kids' home in the Quarriers homes. There's a guy called Quarrier. He set up these children's homes, again, village schools all around the UK. And each time he moved a kid from one to the other, he was paid money, transference money. So it was money, and it's trafficking. And of course, when they were there, at the very least, they were whipped and beaten. But really, it was procurement for sexual activity with members of staff, and nothing is ever done. So, you know, really, that is it in a nutshell, how this has come about. You know, child traffic, sex trafficking, however we want to term it, if you shut your eyes to it, you ain't going to see it. If you close your ears to it, you ain't going to hear it, and it's never going to come and speak to you, right? It needs a proactive approach. The signs are all there that a kid is being sexually abused. They're not teaching it in schools, you know. Luckily now I'm going into institutions. I'm being asked to give my slant on it, and the ICSA inquiry is promoting my role in some of that as well. And when you've got people like Peter Wrighton that are setting the narrative and the training schedule for this, well, what chance does anyone, not just in speaking out, but anyone who wants to investigate this, where's it going to go? It ain't going to go anywhere. They're going to be beaten down. They're going to close ranks, so it's not going to happen. When I started my campaigning, a few years ago, I got a message through from Alan. I'd never met Alan before. And Alan turned around and said, look, I'm going to be serving a petition on Hammersmith and Fulham Council to do with Alan's time in Beach Home. And I hadn't really known about Beach Home. It had cropped up. It had. I had quite a few people had come to me that had been in Beach Home and were taken to places like Elm Guest House, etc. So I had heard of it. And Alan had documents that needed to be served. So I said, I'll come and do a podcast. So I went down on a rainy Wednesday morning, went down to Hammersmith. We set up a camera, and the next thing, security have thrown us off the premises. But from there, I've gone on to support Alan, Sue, Jean, and the other Beach Home survivors in their campaigning. So, I mean, that's how I've come about, and we work closely ever since. But, sorry, Al, I'll pass over to you now,
It's a lot of metaphors John uses. The underlying tones are so real in everything he says and everything he's said. When I was born on the 25th of March in 1955. I was the youngest of four. I had two sisters and another brother. Born in Hammersmith Hospital. We lived in West London, Shepherd's Bush area. And it was a tough existence. My mum and dad were both alcoholics and drank, and we were just basically running around the streets. So what we found was supervision orders were being taken out by the local council and placing us in, they then called it respite care. I think actually the term's still used this day, where you went in care if they seemed or deemed it necessary for you to return back to your parents, or if they were turning over a new leaf. But some of the stuff that John's touched on, there was a fee that my parents got into debt with by paying social services, and my mother couldn't afford to pay the debt back. So at one stage, she got into debt with the people who were there to so-called be helping you and with the problems that you had with your family. And we had problems because in our day, we used to have not social workers, but they were called childcare officers. So we called them CCOs. Now, I was very, very young when I first went into my first children's home. And I think between the age of 1 to 6, I think I went in about 5 different children's homes. Now, the links and what, again, John has been saying, the links to a lot of these homes are unique, because when we talk about paedophile rings and we talk about pit things, not only are the punishments similar to what they do, but the methods, the torture, the torment, and the agony and the suffering they bestow on their victims is exactly the same. So we had a real tough time. I mean, I remember the house we were in, we just used to stand outside pubs because our parents were going drinking all day long. We were standing at a glass of lemonade, was probably brought out to us, and a packet of crisps or something like that. We didn't eat well. I was very skinny and malnutrition. I was very, very, none of us were. When we talk about bread and dripping and white bowls of lard, those are the things that we used to live off. And we used to kind of live, our treat was a thing called pie and mash. We used to have a pie and mash shop. We used to go there, and that was because in the old days, we used to have sixpences that you used to put in the telly, and then we got a refund when the guy came round. He gave you so much silver back. And so that was beer money for my parents, and it was a sixpence or something like that for you to go to the pie and mash shop. One meal a week, you probably went and had it down at the pie and mash shop, and you was just lived off grease basically for the rest of the week. But our first house, my mum was in the pub and my dad was in the pub, and she left the iron on, and it burnt the house down in Mardale Street in West 12, and that was near the Goldhawk Road. And the house burnt down. And the only thing I can remember of that age is we was at the pub and we came down and we saw all this water on the road and the hoses everywhere, and our house was absolutely black. And I remember the plates being really, really black. And I had this tortoise, this toy, and you pulled it on a string, and it front and back legs moved as you pulled it, but it was it was badly fire damaged, and it couldn't do the actions because of the damage that was done to it. And then, of course, the council had to rehouses, and they put us in a place called Stowe Road. So we went to 41 Stowe Road in Shepherd's Bush, and that was near the Uxbridge Road. And we went to there, and we had this kind of like middle floor flat, coal fire, 2 bedrooms. So there was 2 sisters, another brother, and myself. All 4 of us slept in the same bed. We didn't go down into the basement at night because the basement was alive with sewer rats. And the streets in them days, they used to have these metal round lids where the coalman used to come and lift them, pour the coal, and it went straight into the cellars. And these rats used to go along the cellars from house to house from the sewers. And they were the biggest things you ever saw in your life. And I remember once looking down, because I peeped my head round the window with the door and looked down the stairs, and all you could see was these eyes, and just glaring eyes, fluorescent eyes. And I saw one close up one day because it nearly knocked the woman upstairs down the stairs one day, and the thing was like a dog. It was huge. It was like a Yorkshire Terrier. That's how big it was. And, like a medium size, not a little one. And it is big, horrible yellow teeth. And at nights when we used to be in the bed, we could hear them scratching at the door trying to get in. And it was horrific. And we just used to cuddle up in the bed. We had no heating or anything in the bedrooms. And we used to have ice form on the window. And we used to all just have like this one bed for all 4 of us, my 2 sisters and my brother. But my father was very abusive when he in drink. And he used to take a leather belt to me. And I don't know why. I got quite a bit of a brunt of beatings. But he took the leather belt to me. I can remember as young as probably 4 that I was being beaten by my own father. With a leather belt. And it was quite hard. My mum, to control us as well, she used to hit us with these stiletto heels, and she used to aim for your head with the stiletto heels to try and punish you. And I didn't know so much about that, but my sister Anne, and I used to call, because Anne was always left to look after us, my oldest sister, by 5 years difference between me. And that's quite a bit of a difference, actually. And so I used to call her Mummy Anne, because she was the eldest sister, and she did most of the looking after you. So anyway, we went in and out of respite care, backwards and forwards to different children's homes. I think I can name a few. Ellsfield House, that was something to do with Wandsworth Council, and it was like a holding pen. They put you in there until they found a place for you to go to some other place, and that was quite abusive in there. I don't know what happened to me at really young ages, because I can't really tell. I know bits and pieces, the regimental things like Oakley Street, where he had rows and rows of sinks along the wall, and the decor and kind of old Victorian type of buildings or Edwardian buildings like in Albert Street. Because it was just before Albert Bridge, Oakley Street, and it was down there. And I remember that one quite well. Very high up, we were looking down at the street, and it it was just cruel that you was taken away from all your family, and I was kind of like, I don't know, I didn't really know too much about what was going on to me. I remember at around about 6 years of age, I got taken to Marylebone Juvenile Court. Again, court order was taken out for us. Placement was made. And I went to Marylebone Magistrates Court, and the judge looked down at me, and I'm looking up at the judge. I'm trying to work out what it was. I can see this unicorn, and I thought, I've never seen a horse with a horn out of its head. And I wonder what it was. I was trying to make it out, and this lion and the coat of arms symbol. And this judge is looking down at this 6-year-old boy and said, "Would you like to go to the seaside, sonny boy?" Now, I've never been to the seaside, and it was so cruel that the establishment straight away was telling a young child of that age that you're going to get a treat. You're going somewhere nice. It's going to be a nice place. And I was taking this Black Maria to Beach Home in Banstead, Surrey, and God, it was a huge place. They called it Beach Home because it was lined by beech trees. The avenues, the top end and the bottom avenue, were lined by these huge, probably 100-year-old beech trees. And Beach Home goes back to the 1800s. And so when people talk about historic child abuse, Beach Home has this historic element to it. So what happened was the Black Maria pulls up. They take me into the offices first. And there begins a processing. They start talking to you and so blah blah blah. I was too excited to see the seaside. I was just kind of like bubbling. All I wanted to do was get to the sea and see the sea. I didn't care about what they were doing and they took me from there to the stores, and they took all your clothing off of you, and they put me in a pair of shorts. And I said, no, I don't want them. I want my own clothes back. I'd not been put in shorts before, even coming from our background. I don't remember shorts being put on it, and these shorts were horrible. And then you had all your clothes, they had these labels in them, and every part of your clothing had a label in it saying Beach Home, and it was a white label with red writing sewn in, and then there was a gap for your name either to be written in some sort of ink or a biro, and every single item of your clothing, it was as if you was being labelled. Your pants, your socks, your flannel, every single every single item was done. And then one of the we had to call the staff from the office misters. So it was Mr. Dicker, Mr. Banner, Mr. Bruce. Mr. Banner was the superintendent of Beach Home, Jeffrey Banner. And I was taken down the bottom end of the avenue. There was 12 houses down one end and 12 houses up the other end. And they were all named after trees like laburnum, larch, ash, beech, maple, oak, thistle, lime, carrier, and ash, all that type of thing. So they took me to a house called Laburnum. And I remember because they had a yellow tree and the yellow blossom. I always remember the yellow, the flowers on the laburnum tree. And the door was painted yellow as well. And it had a brass plate on it. All the house names had these brass plates on the doors. And I was taken into this house, and the front door opens. And there's this woman looking down at me through her glasses like this, right? And if I said to you, Sean, that she was the splitting image of somebody fictional like Hilda Ogden, where she had this pinny on, she had her hair and rollers, and she was the absolute splitting image of this Hilda Ogden. And she was very stern looking, and she's looking down at me very, very stern. And she introduced me, and we was told we have to call them aunties and uncles. So the office staff, we had to call Mrs. and Mrs. The house parents, we had to call them aunties. Our new guardians would be called auntie and uncle. So I had these two women, Audrey Wilson and Grace Robinson. Anyway, they took me inside, got the children to show me where I was going to be sleeping in my dormitory and bits and pieces, and they took me around and showed me around. And the kids were saying to me, whatever you do not call her Granny Grace. She hates that. She really does hate it. She will punish you if you call her Granny Grace. And I'm going, where's the seaside? Where's the seaside? I'm so interested in seeing the sea. I want to see the sea. You know, I've not been to the seaside. And I'm looking at the back and the fences and looking over the distance over towards Ewell Way. And I can't see the sea. And there was a little bit of a haze. And I said, is that the sea over there? And they said, no, you're nowhere near the sea. You know, the nearest place you will be is Brighton, which is probably 60 miles away. So we was landlocked. And this promise had already struck home that I wasn't going to go to the seaside. And then it seemed to go from worse from that day onwards. The beatings, the torture, the carbolic soap in my mouth, in my eyes, the floor scrubbing brush where they scrubbed you in the bath. And they used to hit you all the time. And it was like torture being put in these trousers, these short trousers, because they used to slap you on the backs of the legs. And it really, really did hurt. It really, really, really stung horrible. And it was so horrific. And then they used to take you in the bathroom and bath you as well. And they would touch you in the bath. And they would do things to you in the bathroom. And they would call you all the names under the sun. You naughty little boy, you dirty boy, you don't answer the staff back, and you'll be being hit, beaten, and there was more water on the floor than probably was in the bath. And the cruelty and the treatment, the harsh treatment that they gave to you, you know, if you walk past them, they'd whack you around the head. You know, you got a clip around the ear roll, a slap round the back of the neck, you know, just slap round the head, kicked, pushed, punched, everything you could name, they'd do to you. And then one night, I was in the dormitory, and I was the boys' dormitory, and it's kind of like it's so hard to imagine this. Where I was in the dormitory, and Audrey Wilson came into the dormitory, and what we used to have, the beech trees down the avenues, had these street lights, and the street lights used to flicker through the leaves, and they formed a dancing pattern on the ceiling of the dormitory, and you used to look up and you could see the wind and the breeze. And this was broken by a huge person, like big person was Audrey, and she was touching me up in the bed, and she was feeling me. I could feel like somebody was tickling me and touching me below, and this went on for a little while, and I got so frightened I curled up in a little ball, and I stayed in that little ball till morning light, and I just curled into a tiny little ball, and I just as tight as I could into. I was so frightened. I was trying to protect myself. I was so frightened. I didn't know what to do, and because of it, I wet the bed. I'd never wet the bed at home or done anything like that, but because of what happened and what they did to me, I wet the bed. So in the morning, 7 o'clock, they used to come and get you. They dragged me out of bed and said, "You dirty little boy." And they was beating me and slapping me, kicking me down the stairs. And they took me into the bathroom. And the thing about the baths and the bathrooms, these big tin baths, cast iron baths type of thing, was almost like a punishment chamber. And they took me in there, run cold bath, and told me to wash my sheets out, "You dirty little boy," and slapping me, "Filthy little boy, cretin, you retard," and slapped you and hit you and beat you. And then made me wash my sheets out in this cold, freezing cold water. And then after I'd washed my sheets out, they made me get into the cold water. These are some of the punishments they used to do to you. And then with the carbolic soap, they used to make you scrub yourself with the carbolic soap and that, and they'd do it themselves. And then what I tried to do is, we used to have a toothbrush, and it was like a coach bolt on the door. And to try and stop them from coming in, used to put a toothbrush in to try and close the door when we was in the bath. And they would come through the windows, and they'd come and get you, and you'd get such beatings and things like that. And they just did it for the joy of it, and it went on nearly every day. I remember, it probably was close to when I first went in there. I remember I'd been through everything else, and I saw my sister coming up the avenue because she obviously heard that I was in Beach Home in Laburnum. And I just jumped up and ran out the house as quick as I can, threw my arms around my sister, said, "I don't like it here, I don't like it here, take me away, Mummy Ann. And Grace Robinson came outside, and she said, "Get in this house now, boy." Almost something like, you'd see in Oliver. She was screaming at her, at the top of her voice. And she turned around to my sister and said, "To get back to your house now, girl, before you get yourself into trouble." And she'd drag you inside. And what they used to do as well is, like, at meal times, you sit round a table and they'd put their meal in front of you. And if you didn't like it, didn't eat it, they would give you it the next day. They'd force you to eat it the next day. And one day they gave me this fish. It was supposed to be a haddock cooked in milk or something. And it smelled disgusting. I thought, wow, that smells horrible. And they weren't the best cooks in the world. And they tried to make me eat this fish. And I took a couple of mouthfuls of it. And it was horrible and disgusting. And I wouldn't eat it. So they gave me it the next day. And they tried to force me to eat it again. And they sometimes would sit next to you, to make sure that you did eat your food. And if you didn't eat it. And anyway, what happened was a bone got stuck in my throat and wedged in my, because they forced me to eat it. And it scratched my windpipe and I couldn't eat anything. So I kind of lived off bread and jam for about a week. But the cruelty and the punishment, and they used to lock you in cupboard doors. They used to stand up and face the wallpaper and stand there for hours and hours until your legs nearly dropping. And you couldn't turn around. And when they were abused in your dormitory, it was almost kind of like regimental. The boys would turn and face the wall, so their backs were showing, so they weren't seen to be looking and looking at what you were doing or at their house parents, because they were frightened if they saw or did anything or were seen, they would be next. And that was the very first house I was in. That was called Laburnum. And then from Laburnum, I went to the primary school, Beach Home Primary School. And I had a teacher called Mr. Margates. Mr. Margates used to hit you with a ruler. And he used to slap it out. The things he used to do, slap you around the head. And he used to walk up and down the tables, the wooden tables with the ink things. And he used to walk up and down, march up and down the kind of like the tables with his hands behind his back. Something you'd probably see in John Brown's School Days or something like that. Really, really strange. If you look at some of the older films, it was very draconian. It was very, very harsh. It was very, very strict. And I didn't have a very good education in the primary school. My education suffered from it. And because of Miss Schultz, we had a guy called Mr. Whiteman. He was a school teacher. So Mr. Margates, you had Grace and Audrey, Grace Robinson, Audrey Wilson. Mr. Margates used to beat you in the classroom and never really taught you anything. Mr. Whiteman was a teacher that had a classroom across the playground, and he used to come up to you and get you in the playground in front of everybody else, and he'd go rifling through your trousers. I mean, you was a kind of like an orphan. You was a kid in a kid's home. You had no belongings, no property, no money, no nothing. You didn't possess a hanky. You had nothing in your pockets. He'd go, "What you got in your pockets, boy?" And he'd rifle through your short pockets, just feeling you up and touching you up, just to get something out of it. And you didn't have anything. I didn't have no possessions. I had nothing. And he was just doing it to touch you up and to feel with. And from there, I went to Larch Cottage, and I ran away a couple of times. It was a thing children did. They used to run away. I tried to escape, and I ran away. And I remember on one occasion, I ran away, and oh my God, I got a little boy running away, trying to get back to Shepherd's Bush from Banstead in Surrey. And I remember getting to Tooting Beck police station. And it was a long, long walk for a little lad that from Banstead. I don't know, I probably walked 15, 16 miles maybe. And so I didn't know whether to go and give myself into the police and then to take me back. But I thought if they do that, I'm going to get punished even more. And I'm going to get even more treatment and more beatings and stuff like that. Because in them days, they used to say children were seen and not heard. So you couldn't say anything. You couldn't do anything. If you reported your abuse, you got punished even more. So you couldn't say anything. You weren't allowed to say anything. And I remember on one occasion I tried to report my abuses to Banstead Police Station, and I got taken back to Beecham in a Black Maria, and then I was called before Superintendent Jeffrey Banner, who used to walk into the offices where the clock tower was, where the clock was, underneath there, and go in there and turn right and go down the corridor, and his secretary's office faced the church, and his office was to the right. And he used to walk into his room, and he'd just have a cane in the corner of the room, and he used to say, "You're heading for that boy." And he grabbed hold of me and put his knee, and he bounced me off his knee in a perverse manner. I think he was trying to work himself off on bouncing me off his knee. This was the guy at the head of the children's home, the superintendent, Jeffrey Banner, was doing this. And he said to me, if I hear any more from you, because your name is coming back to me a lot, you'll be sent to somewhere like Stanford House or a Borstal or somewhere like that. And what you used to find years and years ago, that where you had a police station, you had a courthouse. Where you had a children's home, you had a mental institution. The two were always linked. So what they did with children, sometimes if children made a fuss and said anything, to shut them up, they had threatened to send them away, or they used to put them in mental institutions. So some children went from Beecham and were put into mental institutions to shut them up, or were shipped out. I remember when I was in Laburnum, I remember the coaches coming into Beecham, and they used to pull up outside the nursery at the top end, a bit, just a little bit down from Mr. Banner's house, and the nursery was there. And these sunshine coaches, there was sunshine coaches with rays like of the sun, like arms coming off like beams, and they had like kind of smiley faces on the back of these coaches. I always remember it because they were so distinctive, and they rumours were it was something to do with Jimmy Savile, that the sunshine coaches used to come to Beecham, but we never saw the children again. I don't know what happened to the children. That I couldn't, we tried to make out who they were taking. It was very difficult because it was like a military operation. What they were doing was so regimental, so kind of like organised. It was something all planned and pre-planned and organised and done. And I got caught one day looking out the window, and the staff came in and told me, "Get down from that window, boy, what are you doing?" And they used to shout and bellow at you or whack you just on a daily basis. This was happening every single day. They were giving you hidings for no reason. They had a duty of care. We were placed in harm's way, and all that is immaterial to what they did to you. They were supposed to be our guardians looking after us. And then I was put in a house called Larch Cottage, and that was 2 doors down. And from Laburnum, we had Laburnum, Beech and Larch. And I was put in there there wasn't so many of us in there. There was only about 12 boys. Well, Ian McLaren was the house parent of the house, and he used to beat you with his fists. And he used to come and punch you for no reason at all. He beat me up on many occasions. He'd grab hold of me. He was quite a powerful guy because he was almost like an athlete. He was like a rugby player. He was solid, and he grabbed hold of you because what they used to do is make you wash up after the meals, and one person would either dry up or 2 people would dry up. You'd wash up or whatever duties they made you perform, and you had to do it. And he'd come up behind me, put me in a stranglehold, and push his body against the cupboards. And he was rubbing up against you, and other times it'd get you on the floor, and he was hitting you and that, and he would sit on your back and he would rub his testicles on your back and things like that, as if he was riding a horse. And if you tried to fight him, and I remember one day he hit me so hard with a punch, he lifted me off the floor and I landed into the living room, and he was doing it. He was bathing boys at 12 years of age. And they had this thing with this carbolic soap. They used to use that for punishment. It was kind of like the same torture and same methods of punishment. And I've heard this so many times from other people that, like the paedophile rings, when they talk about it, these guys went on to other children's homes and used the same methods they'd used in one home in another home. So this carbolic soap method and these beatings were done by the same perpetrators in other children's homes as well. And then I went from there to I had a few problems with my education. I didn't do well in the primary school because of what happened to me. I was a very timid young child, malnutritioned. I was skinny, call me whatever you want. We used to have a sick bay there, and we used to get our treatment there. And sometimes we didn't know what they were giving us. They were just told us to take these tablets, and we used to take these tablets. They used to make you line up at 7 o'clock in the morning when you came downstairs, and you had to line up and go into the kitchen under this huge dining room table. And they used to get this big tin jar. It was malt or something, and they used to get a tablespoonful and stick it in your mouth, and you had to have it. And as much as you hated it, they used to make you do it or hold your nose and put it in your. They forced you to do these things, and then I went to Ash after I went from Larch, and there was a guy called Gordon Reed, who was another abuser, and he used to punch you in the back of the head. You walk past and he'd punch you. What you looking at, boy? Bang, and it'd hit you. And then one day he hit me so hard in the head, I didn't even feel it. And I just turned to him and I said to him, "You can't hurt me anymore." I've had so many beatings and so much punishment. And, you know, for a child to say anything, you didn't have a voice. You had nowhere you could go, no one you could tell. If you told a story, it was classed as you're telling lies or you're telling stories. You don't say that about members of staff. And yeah, I think all I can say, my first 25 years of life were very, very rough. I was lost. I was kind of like disturbed. I'm sure I had a bit of mental illness from the treatments that I received from there. And they put me in a hostel. And then when I asked the council if they could help me find a place when I was going to come up to 18 years of age, I left Beecham when I was 16. They put me in a hostel, just put me in a hostel. And I got kicked out. They said, "You're 18 now, you're no longer our responsibility." And I went to the council and I slept on the streets outside the council offices asking them to house me, and they wouldn't do anything for me. And then I was sleeping rough on the streets of London, sleeping in parks. I remember the soup kitchens at Waterloo Station, and some of the stations used to have these like soup places where it was like a kind of burger van type of thing, and they used to do hot soup and a hot drink and a bit of bread, and they used to give you that. And you kind of like outstay your welcome with friends and family and sisters and brothers and whatever by sofa surfing. You know, you can't sleep on somebody's sofa forever. And I started to get myself into bits of trouble, and I started to drink as well, and get myself involved in drugs and drink. And I walked in front of a bus in Lavender Hill once and got caught by this bus. And I was taking drugs one day and got involved in a fight and had my head smashed open in a pub, or a guy beer glassed me and screwed this glass into my head once. And I didn't really know too much about it because I was out of my head on Mandy's. And I used to take speed and all sorts of things and do all sorts of things wrong. And it got to the stage where I used to put a brick through a shop window. And I thought, if I put a brick through a shop window on a Friday, I've got a place to stay Friday night, Saturday night and Sunday night, and I won't go to court until the Monday. So I'd only have to find somewhere to sleep 4 nights a week, and I didn't mind sleeping on the benches and in the park or wherever it was.
Bloody hell, this is a lot to process. My brain's just gone like, whoa.
And I got myself into so much trouble, Sean. And I ended up going to prison for doing things what I did, being silly on drink and stuff like that. I went into Brixton prison, and you see all sorts of things. And
before we get to the prison stuff, can I just ask you a few questions about what you just said? Let's go back then to you going into the Kerr in the very beginning. What was the actual reason they gave for putting you into Kerr?
Sorry.
It's okay. Fine. Doing brilliantly.
It's difficult.
Yeah, you're fine. You're fine. You're absolutely fine. Just take your time. Did they say there's a specific reason you have to go into Kerr? Did the government say no? Okay. No. My next question is then, when you went into the Kerr, you said you thought you were going to go and see the beach and all this kind of stuff, and then these things happened. How mentally did you adjust the first time something happened? Like, are you in shock? What could you take us through it a little bit?
No, the treatment was okay. My father used to, when we lived in Shepherd's Bush, and my father used to come back in a drunken stupor, and he used to, I don't know why, but he took it out on me for some reason, and we had this table in the front room, and there was this cardboard box that was underneath this table, and I used to hide in this cardboard box under the table because I knew I would get it when my dad came in. And, he used to just take the leather belt to you. And I don't know why. And so it affected me at a very young age.
And how old were you then?
I was only 4 or 5. I mean, going in between respite care, I mean, I was virtually in I think this shows records of me being in care in 1959. If I was born in 55, and it shows me in care and care records in 59, and then Beecham in the 60s and so long like that, and there were several houses like there was places like Oakley Street, Elsfield House, and there are other children's homes names. There was one in Camberley, and another place. There's quite a few. I managed to get my records in the end, but what makes it the whole thing worse about it, and what brings it back now, is that for whatever I went through in my 30s when I met my wife, I used to wake up in the middle of the night fighting and kicking out and jumping up in my sleep and fighting in the room. I was fighting them shadows where, I saw the dancing patterns on the ceiling in the care where I was being abused in the dormitories, and I was fighting them shadows, and my wife used to calm me down, pat me and calm me down and settle me down, and then I kind of, accepted it, and I was offered a chance to move in with Kathy, and I left London because all I was doing was drinking and get myself into states, and I would have ended up in a doorway somewhere, and or probably dead. I don't think I could have survived what I went through, because I was mentally disturbed, I think, by it all, and it really did affect me. And then, as I say, you kind of. It was weird. There was a little bit of a saviour in there somewhere, because when I moved to Lincolnshire from London, I was doing odd jobs and bits and pieces. I was just doing a bit of this and a bit of that. And there was a job for a caretaker going in a school. And I thought, I don't think I'll get the job because I've got a criminal record. And I went and I said to the head teacher, I put my cards on the table, but I've been brought up in childcare. I know I've had a lot of problems, and I've got myself into a little bit of trouble, and I've even been to prison. But they do a CRB check on you anyway, so they can find out exactly how bad you were. So I did that for 15 years, and what I managed to do is, by the time I was in London, I was doing some plumbing work, and I tried to get jobs doing this, that, and the other, and I did work for a plumber for quite a while. And I was trying to make, it wasn't all bad, because I was trying to make a life for myself, but I was naive and stupid and did silly things, and I don't know whether it was psychologically I wasn't the full ticket, and the light was on, but no one was, the light was on, but no one was home. I wasn't educated, but I managed to survive. I don't know how I survived. But Beecham was such a horrific place. It was historically abusive. Going back to the 1800s, it was for the poor children of Kensington and Chelsea. They went there. It was workhouses. The kids used to come out of them houses, cottages, to a brass band at one stage, and they used to join on the end of the brass band, and they used to march them off to the workhouses. So the reason why I jumped at the opportunity to do this, Sean, was because Beecham's story has never been told. And you can see I'm 66 and it still affects that 66-year-old man. And I saw shrinks and all sorts of people. And the shrink said to me, Alan, there's nothing wrong with you. You've got a memory. And the only thing that is your memory will never let you forget these things. And, you know, like I say, I got this job. Head teacher give me the job. I stayed there for 15 years. I worked my way up from, because I'd done the plumbing, stuff like that. I could do the plumbing in the school. I did the grounds maintenance, and in the end, they made me site manager, and it was a really good job for me, and I was done well. And then I moved to Louth because my wife wanted to be near her children. And then a few years ago, I got a phone call out of the blue from Surrey Police, and Surrey Police here. We've had a report. Somebody's walked into a police station and said they was abused in a place called Beecham, and your name has been mentioned. Can we come and interview you? So the worst part about that is, you know, if you pick a septic wound or that wound, it will turn septic again. If you open that can of worms or that tin, you're going to open a hole that you try to forget or put in your past. And they came to interview me, and sometimes you just can't help it. The emotion sometimes finds that weak part of you, finds that child within you. You know, at the end of the day, we're just vessels, and there's part of you that will find, the weakness, and it does come out of me. It does come out of me, and I've done this at demonstrations, and because I go and be a child campaigner now. And this is what I do now. And I was at a rally in Nottingham, and I broke down. And thousands of people were shouting, Alan, Alan, Alan. And John was standing next to me. And it even got John, that the raw emotion of these people calling my name made me worse.
What we got to look at, Sean, is that going back 2 years prior, with just Alan and myself stood outside, the Plaza area in front of Hammersmith getting pissed on by the rain, and then 2 years later 24,000 people shouting and clapping for him to speak. So it's come a long way.
Your passion and your emotion is what makes your message
absolutely
resonate with people.
I would hate it to happen to anybody else. Now what I've done is to make everything above board. I've started a limited company. I've called opened a group called Beecham Action Group. What I'm trying to do is try and raise some money, but I do take them on. I want to take the council on, because, they put me in harm's way, and they put me, they had that duty of care. Now, all I've ever had is that brick wall. They've never tried to help me. I've written to all the politicians. I've written to Labour councillors, Tory councillors, CEOs, mayors, you name it, at Wandsworth and Hammersmith, only to be shot down. And I could not get my records from Hammersmith Council, my birth borough, although Wandsworth, it's like John was saying earlier on, when you're talking about the LCC, the London County Council, and then the GLC, where they separated the boroughs up into like Camden, Westminster, Kensington and Chelsea, Hammersmith and Fulham, and all these boroughs. Then you now have a mayor of London. The amount of children's homes and I don't think London, at the heart, the city of our country, the main capital of our country, the amount of abuse that's gone on in London, doesn't even come to the surface. We hear about abuse happening in Scotland, Jersey, Northern Ireland, and various other parts of the country. Yeah, but you very rarely, and this is why I wanted to come on, because I wanted to talk about Beach Home. It was almost like a forgotten. I mean, at one stage they reckon there was 900 children in Beach Home, and when I was there, I should say there was probably about between 240 and 300. But there's still a lot of children. There's still a lot of children, and those children were affected really, really badly. Some went on. One guy went on to murder. Other people had psychological problems.
Do you know who he murdered?
I don't know. The police just said that there was a story that when in 1968 the church got burnt down in Beach Home, and people talk about SRA and satanic ritual abuse. Whether that was happening in Beach Home, I don't know, because I was too young. But people would often say late at night, you could see the candles flickering in the church altar type of area late at night. But who would be in the church at that time of night, and what was going on? And then in 1968, I think I came home for a weekend, and they allowed, as you got a bit older, to come home at weekends. And I used to come home and then I'd go back by Sunday night. And I remember when I was home one night, my mum took an overdose and tried to kill herself. And all these things that happen, they all stay there. And you go through so much, and it's horrific. It is torture. It's abuse of every sort, physical, mental, sexual. And you're just a pawn in the whole complete system of, and it's not nice.
Do you remember your first day in Beach Home, or is it
Yeah.
too long ago? What could you take us through your first day?
The very first day I was excited because I thought I was going to see the sea. I was going to be in the seaside. So all the way there, my excitement was just to go to the seaside, and for me to be so disappointed and then go through the process of, being psychoanalyzed and then being taken to the stores.
When you say you were psychoanalyzed, what did they specifically do?
You just ask you questions about yourself, and it was just basically just processing you.
Like personality tests?
It was kind of like there was a lot of talking, a lot of people. You standing in a room like a lone person, and there was staff everywhere, and it was. Am I being vetted? I don't know what the word is, Sean, what they was trying to do to me, but it was kind of like a psychoanalyzing. What have we got before us? What boy have we got before us? What methods are we going to take with this boy? What do we have to do for this child? Or what would happen to this child? And then the placement of house makes a difference as well, because it's a horrific story right through my life, because they put me in a house, my brother in a different house, and my two sisters in different houses. So as a family, we never ever share the same room ever again in life.
Ever again?
No, never again.
They were on different journeys from
Yes.
from that moment.
Yes, they didn't put us in the same house as a family. It was never a family again.
How did that separation anxiety feel?
Horrible.
Could you get any messages to them?
Yeah, I was close to my oldest sister. My brother Frank turned into a raving nutcase. He was like my dad. My dad used to stand, if I remember rightly, in long john, pissy yellow long johns, and want to fight the street in a drunken stupor, and calling all the neighbours and everybody, all the CUNTs under the sun. He was a very aggressive, very abusive man. Well, he beat his own son with a leather belt, not telling what he did to the others. But it was, none of it was any. It's hard to accept that what they did to you, it was all a form of punishment. The fact that the authorities are saying you're going to the seaside, the fact that these people are supposed to be your guardians and abuse the role that they were given to look after children, and to treat you in such an appalling manner, and to do things to children. These weren't qualified people to look after children. You know, they were perverts.
When you got assigned to your house, then what was your sleeping quarters like?
So when you went up the stairs, what you had, we weren't allowed to go in the front door. Never ever allowed to go in the front door. As children, we had to use the back door. And as you went in the back door, you know, with the coach bolt again, and it was quite closed quite viciously, and there was a toilet as you came in the back door, and we was told you only use that in emergencies. You have to go outside to the outside toilets. So there was 4 toilets outside, in like a shed, and we had to go to an outside toilet in the freezing cold, and there was a little alcove where the coke was for the boiler house, and where they used to make you do chores and like the washing up, as I explained, or you got the coke in or the coal in, and they used to have parkway fires were rubbish, and it was such a cold place. And then as you came in the back door, you had like a cloakroom, and all the coats down that corridor were hung up by the kids where all the coats and jackets and stuff like that went. And then there was a stairs right next to the toilet that took you upstairs to the dormitories. So this end you had the boys' dormitory, and the other end you had the girls' dormitory, and then in between there was a corridor, and you had these huge cupboards which had all the sheets and bedding and stuff like that in, and probably clothing or whatever. And you had doors that went into the staff quarters. You know, like the house mother, the assistant would have their own rooms permanently. So that was their room. They used to lock their own rooms, used to go in their own rooms. You never. I went into Audrey Wilson's room once, right? But I don't remember too much about it. I just remember her taking me into her room, but I can't remember too much about that. I just remember going into her room, and because I just remember the smell from her. She was very, very unclean. She was very, very smelly kind of woman. Suffer from a woman's problems and BO. She had very, very strong, musky smell about her. She was horrible, and the stench was horrible from her. And you know, I don't know what happened. I can't remember everything that happened to me, because so much happened to you as a child. You know, it's horrific enough talking about it and going back to them years. And you know, you went there. You had the kitchen, this massive kitchen to the left, just after the cloakroom, and then you had the sinks there, and there was a big glass window that faced the cottage the next day. So they was like turned facing each other, the houses, the cottages, and so you was looking from one kitchen into the other kitchen, and then the house was kind of reversed. So whatever way your house was, the house would be the opposite direction. And then you went upstairs, and you had the boys' dormitory. You had something like sometimes 2 bunk beds, then some single beds. Then you had 2 cubicles for the elder boys, and they had double bunk beds in them. And then you had the same sort of scenario in the girls' room. And then down the other end, you had a bathroom, which the staff were only allowed to use. You weren't allowed to go into. You weren't allowed to use it. You had to go into the bathroom downstairs. And then you had the office opposite the front door as you came in. And it was quite appalling, really, because I remember I was some sort of case file. I had a CCO called Mrs. Lazenby. She's my childcare officer to start off with, and she was with us for a couple of years, and she was fantastic. The family got on well with her. My sister got on well with her, and then after that, it was like I got a new CCO on a regular basis, and it was like, I don't want to talk to you anymore. I wouldn't engage with them, because I used to get beaten for it, and because why should I talk to a stranger every month and tell her about my problems or whatever? And the staff used to say, if you say anything, you will be punished. And they used to have a day book and everything. They used to write everything down, or what you did and what you didn't do. And yeah, it's very, very strict.
So did you start out in that dorm on what kind of a bunk? Was it a double bunk or just a normal bunk?
I started off, they put me in this bed underneath a window looking up the avenue, in a single bed, and that was my bed for virtually the whole time I was in Laburnum.
And how did you feel that first night?
I cried all night.
Crying all night.
I cried all night. It was because the patterns from them trees played a very, very important part on your imagination, because it was like ghoulish. It was kind of like scary. It was kind of like howlish. It was horrible. The surrounding, you're looking like the room's alive. You know, you're not alone. You feel like there's a presence within.
And they were the beech trees, did you say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The beech trees were making these dancing patterns, and they just reflected all over the walls and the ceilings. And the ceilings were the worst. If you lied in bed and just looked up, you could just see these patterns.
Have you watched The Queen's Gambit?
No.
Okay. Just one, because I'm just thinking of the dorm layout, like the beds and everything, whether it's similar to that. She was like having these weird hallucinations as well, but they were putting them on drugs, the kids as well.
Yeah.
Were they putting you guys on drugs?
Yeah, they were giving us some stuff that were, this same scenario is like my medical records were hard to come by. My education records were hard to come by. My social record, every single thing that you do, medical, whatever it is, whatever format, whether it be health, wealth, or being, was hard to come by or wasn't available, and they either got lost or destroyed in fires. When I did eventually get my files and I went through my files, it wasn't a story that I tell you. It gave the people's names, it gave the cottages, it gave the dates, but some of it was redacted and taken out. Some of it was written in such appalling handwriting you couldn't make it out, and a lot of it was missing. There was gaps between dates, and it was like they kept records of certain bits, but certain bits went missing and were never accountable for. And I managed to go through them, and they said I asked for my records in the 80s because I said I was going to write a book, and I'm still writing that book, and I've done so much of it, but it's getting someone to help me with it, because I've got a little bit about me, but I'm not academically sound, if that makes sense.
After everything you've been through, bloody hell. You know, you're a brilliant speaker coming in here today and saying what you're saying, but I think I would have gone crazy.
Yeah, you see, it weren't easy. There were times, Sean, and I won't pretend. There were times I stood on the station. I stood on sat in Watford station one day, and I felt like jumping. I was it Trellick Tower or somewhere like that? Labatt Grove somewhere, and it might have been Trellick Tower, Labatt Grove, and I was very high, and I didn't know whether to let myself go, because I was going that was when I was still in the hostel. So not only did I go from the abuse from the children's home, I went straight into a hostel. I was in a bad place.
What pulled you back from the brink of suicide?
Weren't brave enough. I don't think I was brave enough. I don't think I was brave enough to kill myself.
What was an average day in Beech Home like?
Abusive, very abusive.
Could you take us through it? Like, you go and get your breakfast.
It was like a military operation. You know, you got up at 7 o'clock in the morning. They got you up, and they was very strict. If you didn't make your bed properly, they make you strip it again, make you make it again. And this was the kind of discipline they try to install in you, that, you know, you did as you're told. If you didn't do as you're told, you would do it again, or you got hidings or beatings, or, you know, then you'd get dressed and you'd come downstairs, you'd line up at the kitchen table, and you'd get this malt shoved down your throat, and then you had to go into the bathroom, and you had to have a wash, clean your teeth, and then you had to sit at the kitchen, the dining room tables, and we used to have about 5 tables in the living room, and we used to sit around there was about 5 chairs, wooden tables, and we used to sit there, and we just had these set procedures that we had to do.
Was there privacy during your washes and baths, or
No.
were they interfering?
Yeah, so the bath time was like because I remember they got another guy who abused me as well, was Pete McTavish from Kerrier. He was looking after the boys in Kerrier House, and at the top end of the avenue. He was he had hands like shovels, and when he hit you, you stayed hit. You felt it when he hit you, and he gave me Grace Robinson or Audrey Wilson and Grace Robinson, Auntie Grace, Granny Grace Robinson couldn't look after. Was saying I was too much, you know. I was probably trying to fight back. I was trying to stop the torture and the torment whatever way I could. And they went to Pete Metaffy and said I was quite a disturbed boy and mentally disturbed, a retard. And he took me to his house and he said, they tell me things that you've been doing this and doing that and other. And he gave me a few beatings and slapped me around the office. He used to take you in the office and give you an hiding in the office where no one else could see because it was behind closed doors. And he'd give you an hiding. And then he'd turn around and say, go and get in a bath. And they used to have this thing about the bath. It was like a ritual. You know, you had to go into the bathroom and then they'd come and check on you in the bathroom. And they used to look at you when you was naked in the bath. And you know, they used to make you stand up and, you know, they stare at you and it didn't matter what you did. They were too powerful. Far, far too powerful for a child. You couldn't fight back. I mean, I tried, but he was so powerful. I couldn't do anything. I was just so defenseless. But Leburning was so abusive. It was like on a daily, I don't know. Why did my dad pick on me, the youngest? Why did I get picked on by Grace Robinson and Audrey Wilson? Why? Why did they go for me? I mean, you know, I was no special kid. I was just a kid, you know.
Did they have recreation, like sports and stuff?
We used to have a sports day up the top field, and they used to have their own kind of like, there was a cobblers in Beecham, there was a photography thing. I did a bit of photography when I was in there. I went to the Scouts when I was in there. I didn't like that. They used to make you go to church twice on a Sunday, once in the morning, once at night. They used to make you put on your Sunday best. You had to dress up to go to church. Hated it. Absolutely hated it. They made you do it. You had to get up first thing. You got into your Sunday best. And you used to only get changed, I think, once a week. They would only give you clothing on a Saturday. And the only time you ever got any new clothes is when you went on a summer holiday. They'd take you on a coach, and coaches came from Epsom to take the kids. And you used to see the coaches lining up outside other houses and cottages and think, oh, they're going on holiday. And they'd take you to somewhere like Clacton in a B&B. And that was a treat in itself because they couldn't punish you when you was what they'd shout at you, but they wouldn't lay a finger on you in the outside world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because no witnesses, no crime, they're thinking. Yeah, so did your parents visit you?
No, my dad died when I was 10 years of age. And my mum, she just went to pieces. And it's a cruel story. The whole of it, everything is a cruel story because another thing what happened was my sister Marjorie, she was abused by a guy called Uncle Gray, Mr. Gray, and his wife were very abusive. They got done in 1971. And another girl that is part of the Beecham Action Group, she was locked up in an institution because she threatened to say something about the abuse that he was found in bed with another child. They did the same with my sister. They abused her in the bathroom. This is the torture they used to do to girls and that, you know. And you remember my sisters were 3 and 5 years older than me. So if they were starting to develop or whatever the case might have been, they might have, you know, the bathroom was an attack place. The office was an attack place. The bedroom door, they could close the bedroom doors. They could. I did do a thing on Wake Up UK, and it was called Behind Closed Doors with Alan Merritt. Those closed doors are very, very significant to me because what happens behind closed doors is something you can't talk about, you can't see, you might hear it. And like John turned around and said about hearing, seeing, and whatever, you don't see a lot of it, you don't hear a lot of it. There's this kind of like wallpapering and pasting over everything and anything that's got to do with this form of abuse on children and minors, that how these powerful can get away with and superior to what you are as a child, because you've got no defense, you've got no nothing. You're a lamb to the slaughter, and that's what it felt like, and it was very, very harsh.
So you described some horrific physical abuse in your home before you went into Kerr. Would you say to an extent that it made you less shocked when it did happen in Kerr because you'd already suffered some physical abuse at home, or were you re-traumatized all over again?
No, you're traumatized. Oh, big time. You don't expect it to happen. You don't.
You thought you were
think
safe.
Yes.
You thought you were safe.
I'll just take a quick comfort break, Sean.
Yeah, go
Is that
for it.
right?
Go
Sorry,
for it.
Al.
Yeah.
No,
I just had to pick my
Yeah,
right
yeah.
moment. I'll be back.
Yeah, you just have to accept everything that you're told, everything you do. And I think I ran away from beach home 2 or 3 times to try and escape. And I became, now I've been asked this question before. If you've been abused, do you become an abuser?
Mm.
And I have to say, and I was a little bit guilty for the older boys would make you fight some of the younger boys. If you didn't fight them, they would beat you up. So you had to fight them. They say, make them dance or something, or punch him in the head. Harder. I don't want to. And then they'd whack you or punch you. And if you don't punch the other lad. So kind of, I am so guilty for doing that, but I was made to do it. It made me out to be a little fucker. And I didn't want to do it, Sean. I didn't want to be like, but some of the older children were abusers themselves, and they abused some of the children in there. So not only did you get it from the staff, you got it from some of the children as well.
And when you say people who are abused sometimes become abusers, that includes self-abuse, doesn't it? Which is, I think, more prevalent. You've suffered this abuse. You don't know how to deal with it psychologically, so you abuse yourself, whether through drugs, self-harm,
And I did that.
or suicide attempts.
Yeah, I did all of that, went through all that emotion, all that. I think, I don't know what it is, Sean, how you could, you to put it in a nutshell, is there's so much damage done. You know, there's no cure. The only cure is solace in something else, whether it be drink or drug. You look for some alternative to help you get over it, and you try anything to make it go away. And at the end of the day, like the psychiatrist says, you're never ever going to forget it. And I apologize for breaking down earlier, but
No, it just makes your story all the more powerful. No need to apologize. So you said the physical abuse started pretty quickly when you got into the home. Did the sexual abuse start equally quickly, or was that later on?
the beatings, the physical abuse came first. The sexual abuse came after a little while. It might have been weeks after I'd been in beach home, or it wasn't for a little while I noticed it. But, you know, what can you do?
I mean, did you understand it at that age because you were
No.
so young?
No, I didn't. I knew it wasn't right, but that's all you can say about it. Why would women want to touch little boys? You know, why would grown women? What would grown women? I mean, that's easy to say now, in hindsight, but when you're a child, you're in the wilderness.
And did that traumatize you in a different way then again?
My problem was that it done more damage to me than I can ever make out. I suffer from terrible outbursts of aggression. I'm not the most tactful person. I've had so many ding dongs with employers, and I've lost so many jobs by being told what to do, and people talking at me rather than to me. And I've had that all my life, and I won't have it anymore. And I've gone through works and jobs like that. I've lost many a job through telling the manager to fuck off or whatever the case might be. Who are you speaking to? Or I'm no angel. I've done things wrong. I've done silly things. And I went off my head a little bit. I really did.
As you got older and bigger, were you tempted to confront any of your abusers? Did you fantasize about anything like that?
See, it's very difficult to say because even in the 70s and 80s, you didn't talk about homosexuals. You didn't talk about gays. There was I think it might have been where queer bashing came into effect. It's a horrible word and horrible thing to say or a term to even use at this moment in time. But all that kind of stuff, Sean, you didn't talk about. You just did not do. You just not talk about. You weren't allowed to. And I think if you've been punished for speaking out or saying anything, are you frightened that more's to come? And do you just toe the line to try and have the punishment come to an end and to stop? And like I said to you, by the time I got to Ash and I was punched in the head, you're almost kind of like, I don't know about immune, but it kind of like bounced off my head is to say, well, what can you do to me that you haven't already done? How can you hurt me any more than you've already hurt me? What can you do to me that you can't explain it? None of it is, it's very, very difficult to explain to a person what it's like to be that little child in a big, wide open world where, you could be swimming with sharks. You could be thrown to the crocodiles. It's thrown to the lions even, and that's what it felt like, Sean. That's absolutely what it felt like. You was just like some sort of bait, some sort of bit of meat, and you were just tossed and toyed with.
So obviously you were suffering throughout your ordeal. Did you have an absolute low moment, though, that you could recall?
I used to try and just blank it out. What can you do? What can you do? You're walking the streets of London, not knowing what to do, not knowing where to go. There's some food or hopefully that pot of gold at the end of that rainbow, and you just follow it and you just go wherever it takes you. And I managed to survive. I don't know how. And to be truthful, if I hadn't met my wife, she saved my life. Absolutely, categorically, she saved my life because I would have lost it big time because I was just so distraught, so broken, and just so damaged.
Could you expand on what you said about Jimmy Savile and the care home?
Jimmy Savile went to Beecham in 1972, and I remember being in the dormitories and looking out and seeing these sunshine coaches that are linked to Jimmy Savile. Now, the only way I can explain to you about Beecham, to me, Beecham was like a sweet shop to a paedophile. So Jimmy Savile would have been at home in his element with children, being able to do what he could do. In terms of Jeffrey Banner bouncing them off the knee, he's done that in so many times in Jim Fix where he had children on his lap and stuff like that. That reminds me the same of what Jeffrey Banner did to me. And he was in Beecham in 1970. That's the only record that I know at the same time I left. I wasn't there when Jimmy Savile was there, but he was in Beecham in 1972.
I just puked in my mouth, then had to swallow it back down. Do you have any questions yet, James, about care homes or Savile? Any additional information for the documentary?
I'm sorry, I lost it, but
No, you're fine. Honestly, you're doing really good.
It's very, very difficult thing to talk about. It's if you don't say nothing, no one hears you, and you can shout from the tallest building, and no one will hear you, or no one will listen. It's just that's what you go through. and it does stay with you.
How can we protect the kids in the homes now?
I think anybody who works with children has to be vetted properly. This has got to be the fundamental. Any weak link, they have to do. Somebody has to be trained.
What I'd say on that, Alan, is that the thing is with vetting, DBS check it, vetting, and CRB or whatever they class it as. Paedophiles, on the whole, a sex offender against children will not have any criminal convictions, right? If they do have convictions, it tends to be for dishonest crimes such as deception. On the whole, not like a recidivist offender, like an armed robber will have a history, a catalogue of offending behind it. Sex offenders are very, very crafty, intelligent. However, they do have very, very high accurate lie detector testing, polygraph testing. Make them have a polygraph test.
Yeah, that sounds a good idea.
They should do it with politicians as well. Politicians, have you had any involvement with paedophilia? Have you got any sexual liking to children? Everyone in position of power should be made to take a polygraph test.
Wouldn't be no politicians left, would there?
But we'll take their jobs. That's all right. We'll get their money and take their jobs. But, but they're almost absolute. It's a no-brainer. It should be used in the criminal justice system, but it isn't, because it will ferret them out.
And the thing that I've found now, I've gone down the common law route, and I've got away with one or two things using common law, and sometimes there's more to a book than just the cover, and you've got to look in that book. You've got to, although I'm not academically brilliant, I can still do things. Which I've virtually taught myself to read and write, and what I used to do that was to write student leaf pads. I kept writing in the student leaf pad as if it was lines. If I was doing lines, I was being punished. Again, the punishment element comes into it, or self-discipline, to try and learn from whatever you can grip from life, because the only university I ever went to was the University of Life. The only thing I ever got out of life is what I put into it.
Do you think because of technology then, like, you didn't have internet, but like kids in care homes now who have got something's happening to them, they could reach out online to organizations or somebody to get help? Is that a feasible thing these days?
But there are loopholes. There are ways, means around it, because like John has said about, wrong-uns and paedophiles and child abusers and whatever wake or whatever form, there could be judges, there could be solicitors, there could be police officers, there could be anybody from any walk of life. But, I don't think you can counteract it. It's if it's in them, and as harsh as that may seem, children won't be protected.
These people know the child's mind. So even in the absence of technology, people have still got their mouth and they can still shout and scream. There was a guy, he went to Eton. His father was dead now, but his father was a very famous lord. And he doesn't want me to mention it, so I won't. But he stood in Eton town centre saying that Eton is nothing more than a rent boy racket. The fagging system in Eton is a rent boy racket. And he was dragged in. He was caned so hard that his skin was ripped to pieces. He said the dean of Eton took a run up and hit him each time. He was then put under the pupillage of a Monsignor who went on to rape him. And that was his punishment for speaking out against rape. He was raped. It's a control of the mind and the tongue. When you take victims of satanic abuse, they can't even talk, some of them. They're frozen because they know what they do. They bring shame into it. They bring guilt into it. They bring a transference into it. This cognitive distortion. These are very devious people. And then they'll say, we've got police officers, we've got doctors. And we've seen that. We saw that in the Islington care home, where the staff were involved. They were making porno films. They were pimping them out. They go to the police. These kids do sometimes go to the police. But then what happens? Nothing. And this is the problem, and the internet is a two-way thing, because Years ago, you could detect kids that were involved in vice because they'd be on the street. You knew where to find them. You go to the meat rack in Piccadilly, you'd find the boys. You go into Wimpy bars, the boys are there. You go on streets like Market Road in Islington, the Caledonian Road in King's Cross, Sussex Gardens in Paddington. You'd find the young girls. You know what they are. The internet has taken that away. The internet now, it's all done covertly, and these kids are delivered, dropped off, boom, boom. So it's a two-way thing. I think what we got to do is start getting results in the legal system, start showing the victims and survivor this is a safe place to be, is to speak out. We are going after these bastards. We are nailing them. Come forward, be part of that machine that does some destruction. How many people that were abused by the likes of Jimmy Savile in Beach Home, and there was a girls' school down in Surrey that he was going in. I can't remember the name of it now. That when Savile came on the television, would be screaming and throwing things at the telly, And then they went to the BBC, and the BBC did the same old thing, the same old adage. We've looked into it. There's nothing to see. Please move on. That was a BBC's first response. Yesterday, Alan was at a protest. They went outside the BBC building shouting "Shame on you" and throwing paint bombs at the what's the name of that
statue? The
statue. I can't remember the name of the guy. It'll come to me in a minute. They're paedophile statues outside, the BBC building. Time and time again. Yeah, time and time again, we are seeing these failings with the same old response. We've learnt, let's move on. And all the time, what's happening? What's happening is there is no justice. No one is arrested. Solicitors are making 450 quid an hour every single hour, guaranteed for the next 10 years. Boom, 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 boom. But what are the survivors getting? A sixth of our budget goes on the justice system. It ain't working. It's never worked. These care homes have never worked. They've all made money.
Good point.
They would have, Beach Home, Alan, they would have been given a good budget to feed you, and they scrimped.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they did it all the time. They were paid for staff that were meant to do the right job, and they chose not to. These people chose to hurt you.
There was a video that was made called Gail is Dead. It's on YouTube, and there's a lot of elements of Beach Home in it. There was a Channel 4 documentary made. It's got my brother Frank speaking on it. It was made by Channel 4 in the 80s. So what John said and everything that John said, it's just feeds each other. Everything feeds off of everything that John said. Everything John said is so realistic, so true. When I listen to him, it's a mirror image of life, of what I went through, what I've seen. And like he talks about the BBC, that you Stuart Halls, your Rolf Harris's, your Gary Glitters, the many, many others like Jimmy Savile's, the Esther Ransons that fronted Childline, that knew all this was going on. Johnny Rotten that spoke out about the abuse that was going on at the BBC, only never to be allowed back on the BBC again for speaking out about them.
Banned from Top of the Pops.
Yes.
Yeah.
Again, we look at Childline. I worked on the police's child abuse investigation. Our referrals come from, things like schools, social services, right? You ring 999. It's easy. Bang, bang. You ain't got to put any money in. Yet Childline is this 9, 10, 11 digit number, whatever, which I can't remember what it is. Since all my time there, I can remember out of the hundreds, if not thousands, of referrals that come in, two that I recall came from Childline. Where are they going? What are they doing? She might sit there, and grizzle Esther Ransom saying, I never knew. Do you know what? It ain't good enough. Commissioners of police saying, they've slipped through the net. It ain't good enough. Politicians that have got links to paedophilia. It ain't good enough. They have to go. We need to wash them all out. We need to drain this swamp as it is. We need to give the survivors the voice, and we need to start putting proper amends. And if it means that six of the budget goes on paying survivors, it's a small price to pay. Okay, money ain't going to heal it, but it's something.
One thing I would do is, as horrific as it must probably sound, I would do away with amusement arcades and places like that. For the simple reason is the lights and the noise is an attraction to children. a lot of children have ended up going into these places, and they've been used by paedophile groups, paedophile rings to attract children. It's like a magnet. You know, you see bright, flashy lights when you're a child, and it intrigues you. You know, it draws you in. You want to go into these places, and you want to see what these places look like. When I went to the seaside, that is the only thing that I used to love. Used to love the lights. Used to love the noise. Without making the noises of the jingles and jangles that, like organs or whatever the case might be, that were attracted, and the mirrors and the reflection of the mirrors and the glass and the color lights, and it's
Well, if you look at the most notorious paedophile this country had, Sidney Cook, apparently responsible for a lot more murders than that of Jason Swift. He ran a fairground, and this man was a very, very connected guy indeed, and a very dangerous paedophile.
How did they catch him?
I'm not sure exactly how he was caught. I spoke to the best friend of one of his victims, but they called him the Dirty Dozen. One of the copper that was in charge of investigation was a bloke called Stoodley. I ended up working. His son was a copper as well at Scotland Yard, and it was a long-term investigation, but it was fraught with problems, frustrations all along.
Who was the Dirty Dozen?
It was Sidney Cook, a bloke called Bailey, another bloke called Oliver. There was a whole group of them.
It was a network.
It was a network of paedophiles,
Yeah,
and they were picking children up from amusement arcades, from fun fairs, runaway kids from kids' homes. I mean, Jason Swift was killed due to internal injuries after 3 days of raping. And because the one thing I've got to be very careful of is there's so much I could say, but I'll be in a world of trouble. There was a guy that I worked with. He was on the investigation. I can't remember, it'll come to me, Operation Playland or something. It'll come to me in a minute. And he said there's a well-known British actor who does a lot of children's TV and a lot of comedy. And he said his name was on the client list of Jason Swift during that period of time when he was taken. He said, and we raided his house, and it was like a shrine. It was like a shrine to young boys. And he said, and what got me was like day after raiding him, he was on Blue Peter.
But when we was talking about being in the hostel from leaving Beecham, when we used to go on these trips, that glitter ball, that attraction, that light, that that shiny thing, that precious jewel, whatever you want to call it, I nearly ran away with a fair because I was in the hostel and I went and worked on the fair for a few days when I was in the hostel, and they said, "Come with us," and I was getting to the time when they nearly was going to leave Beecham, and I was in two minds to become a traveller and go with them because I didn't know what I was going to do next, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What happened to your siblings then? What was their fate?
So,
how are they now?
Margie's died, my middle sister, and that was a story in itself which was linked to Beecham because she was desperate to have children and give them something she never had, and the partner she was with, she couldn't have children with, so she met somebody else, and they tried for years and years and years fertility treatment, and they said to her, whatever you do, don't stay on it for years and years and years, because you could get cancer if you stay on it for a prolonged period of time. Margie was so desperate to give the children something, right, and hug them and love them like we never, that's the one thing we never ever had. With no love and affection, that is so important in a child's life, to be held, to be cuddled, to be, to be part of a network or a family, just to be that's, you can get infatuated with women when you go out with women. If they show you a bit of affection, it's something you've never had as that child. And it can spoil relationships, and you can become your own worst enemy for it. And Margie was so desperate to have children. She stayed on this for 8 years on fertility treatment, and she ended up getting breast cancer. And then eventually the cancer, they told her she was in remission at one stage, and then they found out it went to her liver. And Margie never swore, she never hurt anybody, she never did anything. And the day she left Beecham, The staff took her to Banstead Station. They put her on a train, and they didn't want to put her in the carriages. They said to the driver of that train at Banstead Station, "Is it all right, driver, if she comes up in the cab with you, driver, just to make sure she gets off at her station?" And the driver abused her in the cab.
Oh, my God.
Oh, bloody hell. God. And what about your brothers?
He went on to be a black belt 8th Dan and fought for the British and European Championships, won quite a lot, but he would sooner punch you in the head than shake hands with you. Very, very aggressive. He was there is this, it does affect you mentally. You know, it's an imbalance.
Of course.
And that imbalance in that, you know, you've taken something from a human being, right, that it shouldn't be taken. And can I have my childhood back? Would be one thing I would like to ask for. You know, if I could have my childhood back, if I could have an education, if I could have had some sort of help in pointing in the right direction, you know, I could be a better person. You know, I will do anything I can for anybody. But if you put me into a corner, I'm not that proverbial rat. I will come at you, you know? And I don't like saying that because it makes me feel like I'm a nasty person. I don't mean any harm. It's just that what has happened to me and what's been done to me is making me that aggressive type of fireball that can't justify it.
And you had one more brother?
No, one brother, Frank.
That's
Frank. It. And two sisters, Anne.
Two sisters.
Yeah, and the eldest Margie died, and Frank. We're all separated. We're all over the country.
Yeah, I see.
We don't really see each other.
Yeah.
That split from Beach Home lived with me for my lifetime.
Yeah. Is there anything either of you would like to say in conclusion to the people watching this?
I would say, you know, if there's anything we can do to help children and stop this, because it's a horrific thing to do to a child, to take that innocence away from a child. You take that innocence and it's gone forever. And I would just beg, you know, people that are going to look after children or be with children, you know, remember that little child deserves a chance.
Anything you've got, John?
Well, these people hide in the shadows, Sean, you know, and as much as your fear is, their fear is being exposed. You owe them nothing. You know, anyone who does that to a child, they deserve, you know, all they get, you know, within reason, obviously, but they're the ones up front because they know what they're doing is wrong. You've done nothing wrong. They had a choice, you didn't. Speak up, come forward, speak up. You know, Alan's got, you can find Alan on social media. You've got the Wake Up UK.
Yeah, Wake Up UK channel and show, and I've done something like about 50 shows on Wake Up UK. And I've interviewed John a few times, other survivors, and we talk about child abuse. Sometimes we have a little bit of we chat. It's a deep subject. You know, when you're talking about this thing, it don't come easy because that little boy, while we've been in this interview, came back out of me. You know, I'm sat here, you know, in a vessel. The released child came out of me talking about what I went through and going back to the times of being that child. And, you know, it's not easy, Sean. It's not easy.
Yeah.
Can I do a little shout out? We've got, you know, a good friend of ours, Wilfred Wong, who's still in prison. He was there. We don't know the full facts, but it looks like it was a rescue attempt that may have gone wrong. Not too sure, and it's difficult for me to talk about because it's an ongoing case. But Wilfred's awaiting trial on remand. I used to be on social media and could promote things, but I'm not on it no more. If I could use this to just put up Wilfred's prison number and his address, keep his spirits up. He's a good guy that does a lot of good to expose satanic ritual abuse of children. And I know this bloke will die fighting for the rights of children to be safe. And the other one is for our old friend, Pepsi Watson. Poor old Adam. Oh, man. Oh, he's back in prison. Again, it's the system not working. You know, it really has brought him down. and he got in a very bad way inside, and as a result, absconded and was recaptured, and he's under this IPP system. He's not in a good place, Adam. He's in HMP Durham again. Please, can we write to him? Really boost his morale. I don't know if we can pull it up, but this is just in case. So I've got anyone looking. If we could hold that up for the camera, that's Wilfred.
We'll put all the addresses in the description box below the video as well.
And I'll just do that just in case it's and there's Adam. Okay, but
if you can email those over to me, that'd be great.
Yeah.
And if I could just finally say, Sean, thank you ever so much for doing this today for
Thanks
us
for coming all
and
this
giving
way.
Beach Home that voice that they so much need. And we've got an action group, we've got a web page, we've got a limited company, and we're trying to raise some funds to get ourselves some justice, some well-deserved justice. And we're asking people for donations. We're not asking for anything untoward. It's all above board. And you know, we want to try and seek justice for whatever happened. There's not many of the survivors alive today, but there are a few alive, and they still suffer. And we just want to try and get them some sort of justice while we can.
And you know, there used to be hold a protest the first Wednesday of every month. It's at the moment not going on because of the health issues out there. But you know, there's Sue who's in the 60s, there's Jean who's in the 70s, and every month they're there along with Alan, you know, campaigning outside Parliament. We even had Boris Johnson. You know, we accosted him one day and he turned around and said nothing to do with me and just walked on. So this is what we're up against. But you know, we'll keep going. But God bless.
So John and Alan's links will all be in the description box. Please support their work. Like John said, all these calls coming in about child abuse, police don't do anything. Yeah, all these calls come in about drugs, and people's houses are getting SWAT team raided up and down the country, left and right, at the expense of tens, if not hundreds of millions of pounds of the taxpayers' money. It's absolutely ridiculous. The justice system is upside down, and as you've heard today, you know, we've got to have safeguards in store for the kids. We've got to have laws changed so predators go away for much longer. So there's some kind of deterrent in place. Because when they know they're just going to get a slap on the wrist, what kind of a deterrent is that? When they know they can just, you know, like the Sins of Our Father priest, join the Catholic Church, they're going to bring a high-priced lawyer in, and you're going to get just moved to another diocese where you can just do it over and over again. What kind of a deterrent is that? So these people have got to know there's going to be some serious consequences for their behavior, and hopefully, you know, that will start to reverse this heinous activity. And we've got all these other people in place now in this network for this mission, as well as Alan and John. We've got Maya, whose podcast recently, it's one of the most powerful ones we've ever done. She's getting an absolutely massive response. And the fact that her evil dad mocked the whole system because he knew he was going to get released within a couple of years and wrote a nasty letter to the judge who said he needs a life sentence. How insane is that? And the judge couldn't give it him. All he could give him was 10 years, of which he had to serve 50%, of which he's already served 2, out after 3. So we've got Andrew Wallace on board now as well from Unseen, who helped to introduce the laws to change modern day slavery, human trafficking, so life sentences for human traffickers. And he also has safe houses for trafficked women. So people could call Alan's charity now if you're a trafficked woman, and you can be screened and go to one of these safe houses. So there's real world changes we're trying to make and real world options for people out there who are going through things. If you're a kid in the care home and you are going through something, you know, these predators say, look, if you tell anyone this is going to happen, that's going to happen, that's going to happen. It's a mental trap.
Mm-hmm.
Reach out, tell someone, and just break it wide open. And more than likely, it will stop if you can get that information into the right hands. And there are people out there who can help you. So let us know what you thought about this video today. It was extremely powerful. Alan just bared his soul. We salute his bravery. Let us know in the comments. Please support these guys by following up on the links in the description box. Huge thank you to Joe and James coming out today to film this. And also a huge thank you to the subscribers. If you've not subscribed yet, subscription logo is in the bottom corner of the screen. So we really appreciate all of your love and support.
Brilliant.
All right, Alan, give us a hug, man.
Thank you. Thank you.
Give me a hug after that. Bloody hell.
Sorry, mate.
Yeah, well done. Wish you all the best. Cheers.
It was not.
Cheers, Sean.
It's not easy, is it?
God bless.